Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Politics. Well, this week, uh, a lot has happened. It's been kind of an eventful week. The big news this week, I would imagine, has been the overtures by North Korea to come down to South Korea, make peace, and denuclearize. We're going to discuss that a little bit later. But what I wanted to concentrate this week on is kind of anti big news. Here's what I mean. The press and conventional wisdom and most politicians, including and more specifically Democrats, have painted the picture that the only options that Mr. Trump, our president, has in dealing with Mueller is to ignore him and continue to take a beating or to fire him. Neither one of those options are good, and up to this point, uh, it appears that Donald Trump has been bullied into believing and seeing only those two options. So imagine my surprise when I saw in the Wall Street Journal an ad that had been done by Kimberly Strassel. So now I did a story a week or two ago by this lady, and she did an outstanding job there. And here she does another outstanding job. She points out one thing uh, that there is much more at stake here than Donald Trump with Mueller. And her article appeared in the op ed pages. And so, what I want to do is, I want to go through like I did the last time, and I want to look at this in depth, and let's pick it apart as we go. Now, the name of her article was called "How Trump Takes on Obstruction." Now, the question is why this high energy president seems to have fallen for the media claim that his only proactive course is to fire Mr. Mueller. It isn't. There are two very bold actions the Trump White House could take to reset the Russia dynamic. Both would aid Mr. Trump's presidency and serve the executive branch and the public in the longer term. So she is setting it up that there's two things that she thinks can be done. And she's also taking it out of the realm of what's good or bad for Donald Trump and taking it to what's good, bad, right, and wrong for the executive branch and the Constitution. And I think that's the bigger question here. So the first one she says is the first is an abrupt overhaul of the president's legal team and strategy. Now, this was written on Friday, and uh, Giuliani was hired for the Trump legal team earlier that week. So I believe that this first one she's talking about is in the process of being done. Mr. Trump has talented lawyers, but not one skilled at confronting the threat at hand. They continue to fret over his personal liability when the real threat is to the Constitution. I agree with that 100%. To this presidency and every future one, Mr. Mueller is by all accounts now focused on obstruction of justice. Mr. Trump needs constitutional powerhouses who can swiftly take the issue off the table. So Mueller is concentrating on obstruction of justice, and here we believe is his primary objective, because Mr. Trump, Mueller is going to claim that Donald Trump fired James Comey in an effort to stop the Russia investigation. She's going to make the argument that obstruction of justice cannot be made out of a president doing his constitutionally given powers. The FBI, the Justice Department, and Mueller, actually, are all part of the executive branch, and he may hire and fire at will with or without cause according to the Constitution. Therefore, for the special counsel, part of the executive branch, to level charges at the president for obstruction of justice for exercising his constitutional duty of firing James Comey is absurd. And if that is allowed to stand, could be detrimental to the power of the executive branch. Therefore, what she's saying is, let's go to court and end this right now. Let's get a clarification on if that's even a possibility. And if it's not, let's stop this right in its tracks. That's her argument. And I agree. I have thought that all along. Constitutional lawyer David Rifkin in December argued on these pages that a president's exercise of the power of his office cannot legitimately be construed as obstruction of justice. Among these powers are the right to direct law enforcement and to fire executive branch appointees at will. Whether or not Mr. Trump's conversations with former FBI Director James Comey or his firing of Mr. Comey were wise, Mr. Trump was exercising rightful powers. If Congress believes he abused his office, it has the power to impeach. If Congress had the authority to criminalize the exercise of presidential power or the judiciary to question a president's motives, the separation of powers would be severely threatened. Well, and here is the difference between legal and uh, a right thing to do. Her argument, in my opinion, is absolutely correct. However, I believe Trump is also operating in a political atmosphere. He may be legally fine by firing Mueller and Comey and anybody else in the executive branch that he chooses. He may be able and perfectly legal, and no legal ramifications would come of that. However, there are political ramifications. If he were to do that and Congress revolted, they could easily impeach him. Now, would it stand up in the court? Doesn't matter, because impeachment is not a legal process. Impeachment is a political process, and a political process can remove a president. So I believe she is taking the point of view of legality and ignoring the political. I think Trump's lawyers have not done. I think they're concentrating too much on the political and not enough on the legal. There needs to be a common ground, and I do believe they need to go to court. But to arbitrarily say that he's free to do whatever he chooses ignores the reality of the political. She goes on, already we are seeing the obstruction narrative threaten other core powers. We are now told it is an obstructionist for a president to use his pardon power, as Mr. Trump did with Joe Arpaio and Scooter Libby. We are told that Mr. Trump is obstructing justice by ordering the Attorney General to cooperate with congressional document demands. And Team Trump needs to understand that the mere specter is enough to constrain the presidency. Mr. Mueller doesn't need to bring a charge. Which is why the president needs a team that focuses on the Constitution, decoupling its defense of Mr. Trump's presidential powers and his personal legal risk. Again, I agree, and the Constitution is utmost, but her argument ignores the political. Even if, assuming he fired Mueller and exercised his power and sustains no legal outcome from that, it will enrage not only the Democrats and half of the U.S. population, but also some of the rhinos in his own party. He would be a lame duck president from here on out, um, and probably would not win re-election all because not because of legal issues, but because of political issues that looked like he was trying to usurp the authority. True or not, right or wrong, politics is what's perceived, not what is accurate. Which is why the president needs a team that focuses on the Constitution, decoupling its defense of Mr. Trump's presidential powers from his personal legal risks. Example, the president's lawyers are currently resisting a Mueller interview for fear the president might perjure himself. The correct grounds for refusing should be that the president will not parley with any special prosecutor engaged in an unconstitutional obstruction probe. What she's saying is it was formed, the special counsel was formed with no legal grounds. In order to have a legal um, special counsel, there needs to be a crime to be investigated. There was no crime. That's been the joke of this thing all along. What they used was a political hit piece paid for by the Clinton Foundation and used and lied about to the FISA court. So now that we know that, there is no legal grounds for this special counsel to exist. So why should Trump uh, sit down and discuss anything with anybody that should not be existing? He needs a team that immediately goes to federal court, I agree, to obtain a declaratory judgment that presidents cannot obstruct justice while exercising core powers. This I agree with. This takes it right off of the table. It takes it out of the hands of the president, the executive branch, puts it into the branch of the judiciary for them to rule. Once they rule on that, because there will be no option. It's spelled out very plainly in the Constitution. Once that is delineated and put into writing, that will end the obstruction of justice. This legal clarification is crucial to preempt any Mueller charge or even report. Again, I agree. It's also necessary to make clear that should the House impeach on obstruction, it will not be doing so on grounds that the president violated criminal law. Again, she's right, but again, she's ignoring the political. Uh, as I said earlier, impeachment is not a legal process. It is a political process, and thus Trump is walking the political tightrope. I think he's slowly but surely taking steps to get to the court and to hire an aggressive legal team, but it's taking time to get it done properly. And I think she is accurate, by the way, but her proposal ignores the political. So now here we go. That's her first. Remember, there were two things that she felt like Trump could do. The first one was to go to court and get a clarification on obstruction of justice and what can and cannot be construed as obstruction of justice within the executive branch. That's the first one. Here's the second one. Simultaneous to legal overhaul, the White House should immediately order the declassification with redactions for sources and methods of every underlying document in the Justice Department and FBI counterintelligence probe, including any paper at the State Department, CIA, and any other agencies that were involved. Everything. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the FISA warrant, emails, text, the interviews with dossier author Christopher Steele, the story of how exactly the FBI came into possession of info about Trump aide George Papadopoulos, details of any as yet undisclosed FBI spying on the Trump campaign. Again, in theory, a great idea. What she's ignoring is the reality of Washington, D.C. They have been going at this for a year and a half. And just as an example, the House Oversight Committee has been after the FBI for a year and a half, or the Justice Department, to get um, all of these papers. They just don't do it. They just absolutely refuse. I mean, when one branch is blatantly refusing to give the papers, just because Trump calls for them does not mean they're going to get them. And even if they agree to and start to redact them, when you think of the volume of paper that would have to be gone through and redacted and then gone over again, and then it would trickle out, it would take 15 years to get that paper done. Again, ideolo- ideologically speaking, she is correct. And I would like to see that happen. And perhaps in 20 years, that will be done. But she's ignoring the reality. She's ignoring uh, just the volume. I mean, just to get, and we still don't have the Clinton emails. But there was just 30,000 emails at that one from Weiner. We still haven't gotten all those. There was emails from Stroke and uh, his lover on the FBI, and we've only gotten a small percentage of those. And just for what we've gotten, it's dynamite. But the time and effort that it takes to do that is just overwhelming, and that will never happen, even though it needs to. The interviews with Dossier, the story of how exactly Mr. Trump's advisors have warned him off of this transparency on the grounds, yet again, that such a release might be construed as obstructing the Mueller probe. No, that might be what they're saying, but I don't believe that's the reason. To repeat, the president has ultimate authority over classification, and no exercise of that constitutional power can be obstruction. Even the few documents the public has seen, the Comey memos, the Peter Strzok Lisa Page text, a glimpse of one FISA warrant, have created a compelling case that the FBI and Justice Department in 2016 abused their power. I don't think there's any question about that. The question is not, do the documents exist? I'm sure they do. And not that they will prove uh, corruption at the highest levels down to the mid levels. And I believe that to be true. In the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department, the IRS, and the EPA, to mention just a few. They are all corrupt to the core. And I believe the paperwork is there to prove that. The problem is not the paperwork. The problem is A, getting to it. Uh, if you had a notebook that would send you to prison and I told you to give it to me, would you give it to me? No. If I went to court and the court said give it to me, would you give it to me? No. And if it looked like it came down to it and I was going to end up having to give it to you, I'd burn it. That's what they're up against. Now, speaking from an ideological standpoint, she's right. I mean, if you could have, if you could totally take over all 5 departments at one time in a simultaneous swoop by the Border Patrol, and in an instant freeze everybody in all of those departments and take all the papers and take them to a central place and have your people go over them, then I believe that's a good deal. But that's just not going to happen, because if you're walking in the front door to serve a warrant, people are throwing papers out the back door, burning them and shredding them and throwing them in the. I mean, they'll never get the smoking gun. Yes, there are risks of a worrisome declassification precedent, but they are outweighed by the gravity of the threat to the executive branch and a potential loss of faith in law enforcement. Now, and that to me is the crux of the whole problem. The American people now do not trust the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department, the IRS, or the EPA, and most government bodies. Now, we have always been leery of our government, but under the Obama administration, any semblance of hope that we had was thrown out the window. They have absolutely politicized those departments and the only hope of bringing them back is to gut them and start over. The nation has the right to the full story now, to understand better how we ever got to a special counsel, and to put Mr. Mueller's ultimate findings in context. And I believe that will happen, but I believe that'll take 20 years to happen. The media and anti-Trump elites have created a false choice that Mr. Trump must either sit back and take it or go on a firing rampage. He has better options. He can define the terms of this debate and defend the executive branch, and he can enlighten the country. But this time, for doing so productively, is growing very short. I agree and disagree. I agree time is growing short, but the wheels of bureaucracy move very, very slowly. And assuming those papers are even still around, because I believe part of the process, part of the reason for the Mueller investigation was not to investigate. Remember, everybody in Washington expected Hillary to bring in a troop of Democrats with her, and they were going to bury all this under the ground where nobody would ever find it. And when that didn't happen, they were scurrying around. And I believe Mueller's job, because he could pick and probe wherever he wanted to, his job is to dig up the dirt and bury it and destroy the proof. I mean, if he looked into collusion between Trump and Russia, he couldn't help but trip over all the collusion between the Democrats and the Clintons and the Russians. We haven't seen any proof of that because Mueller's job was to find the proof and destroy it so nobody hangs. And I believe that's been done. And I believe that'll be shown in the very distant future. When everybody's dead, I believe books will be written to prove that. But for right here and for right now, my take on this article by Kimberly Strassel on how Trump takes on obstruction and what he can do with the Mueller investigation. I think of the two, I believe she's accurate on both stands. And I would go to court tomorrow, uh, to the Supreme Court, to get a ruling on obstruction. What it takes, can it be done in the executive branch by an executive employee with an illegal probe? And I would get that as quickly as possible. And I agree that to be accurate. The second part of releasing all the redacted documents is that's just pie in the sky stuff. That'll never happen. I believe things will trickle out over time, and maybe in 20 or 30 years, any of the remaining documents will be able to be pieced together and a picture painted. But that is just not going to happen. The Clinton emails is a good example of that not ever going to happen. Um, so that was the main story that I wanted to talk about. I think that's going to become a bigger story as we go through the presidency and we get closer to 2020. I believe that that's going to become a bigger story. Now, before I close any programs, I'd like to talk about some current events that are happening. And the first one really makes me sad. It showed such promise 2 weeks ago. There was a caravan coming up through Mexico of mostly Guatemalans coming to the U.S. to seek asylum. Trump tried to get the Mexican government to stop them. Then he sent the National Guard down to meet them, to keep them from entering. And I heard today that the caravan is being met and processed. I hate that word, at the border, and they are all of them are being sent to San Diego. So they're going to get, catch and release. So all of them are going to get caught. They're going to be processed and they're going to be sent to San Diego. Now, if I'm San Diego, I'm kind of ticked off, but you know what? You want to be a sanctuary city? Good. We'll dump them all right in your lap. And I think that's a good, I mean, if we have to take them and we have to dump them, let's dump them all in California. and let's dump them all in San Diego. Let's make one city the example, and when San Diego gets overrun, then let's go to San Francisco. I mean, they want to become Mexico, great. Let's let them become Mexico and secede from the Union. But I'm very sad that Trump did that. I would much rather have been having a discussion today about armed confrontation and some of them being shot and killed, and the National Guard defending our borders against invaders. I would much rather be having that story than the story of the caravan is being crossed and they are being sent to San Diego. That makes me sad. I lost a lot of respect today. Now, the second story I want to talk about is what I call baby Alfie. This kid in England. Now, remember, England has socialized medicine. This kid in England has a respiratory disease. Um, the parents were told that if the baby was taken off the respirator, he would die immediately. The parents went to court to stop it. The courts overruled and took the sides of the doctor. They took the respirator off. The baby lived. They were surprised. The doctors also refused medication of any type and food. So they were either going to starve this baby to death and let the disease kill it or let it suffocate. The parents went to the Pope, and the Pope went to Italy, and there's an Italian hospital that had a plane standing by waiting to take this baby to Italy to treat this baby, to put it on life support and to give it a fighting chance. The English courts and doctors would not permit it. You got to ask yourself why. If the doctors uh, takes the Hippocratic oath, which we do in this country, I don't know about England, but to save life at all costs, and there is a way to save that baby's life by going to Italy, why did they go to court and say, no, we want that baby to stay here and die? The reason is obvious. In socialized medicine, and we as conservatives tried to make this point when we were under Obamacare. When the government takes over the rationing of uh, medical care, they do so with an eye towards money and control and power. That's exactly what's happening in England. Their costs are so exorbitant. Operations that need to be done now are putting off months to get them done. People are dying because they don't have enough resources to cover, and that's what's happening here. This is a rare disease. It's going to be very expensive to keep them on life support, to do the operation, to do the testing, and they don't want that to happen. So again, you have to ask yourself, well, why wouldn't they just push that cost off on Italy and let them go? Because they don't want socialized medicine to look like a failure. Follow the logic. If we have socialized medicine and we say this baby is terminally going to die, and he goes to Italy and he lives, that makes our medicine, that makes our government, that makes our method of medicine look poor and inadequate, which it is in England, by the way. So it was all about jealousy, it was all about power, it was all about money, it was all about control, why baby Alfie was not allowed to go to Italy. And the courts stood behind the doctors, which is amazing to me. Now, as I record this on Sunday, I just found out that baby Alfie died yesterday. And that makes me sad. And England, the courts, and the socialized medicine, you have blood on your hands, and God have mercy on your soul. You made a bad choice and a bad decision, and you made it for bad reasons. Now, the final story I want to talk about is a story that probably is going to be front and center in a few weeks or months, and that is that Kim Jong-un, aka Cabbage Patch Kid or Little Rocket Man, I love that name, Little Rocket Man. He stepped across the demilitarized zone from North Korea to South Korea to meet with the South Korean leader. They have had a love fest for the last few days, and some amazing things have happened. Now, it could be just rhetoric, and the Trump administration is fully prepared to say that it is just rhetoric. But on the other hand, it does, for him to go down there, that's the first North Korean leader that has done that since the Korean War in 1950. But they went down there. Kim Jong Un crossed the border, and he has vowed a couple of things. He vowed to end nuclear testing. He vowed to destroy his nuclear weapons and to destroy the nuclear launch site, and to invite American, South Korean, and UN weapons inspectors in to watch and witness as he does these things and to verify that it is done. Um, and he wants the same for South Korea, which would be fair. Uh, and all he is asking from the United States is two things: to promise not to attack, which we haven't attacked in 60 some years. I don't know why we would attack now, but to promise not to attack, and to legally end the Korean War, which is, both of those are easy peasy. Now, I think when things like this happen, I think this is where lower level bureaucrats become important to do the president's will, to make sure that when the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, the contingencies are taken into effect and we are not hung out to dry with a bad agreement. However, that being said, I believe this is positive stuff. Now, Nobel Peace Prize. When I first heard the idea, I thought that was silly. They are pushing for Donald Trump to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, when you look back at the coverage when Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump were having their schoolboy yelling fest about my button's bigger than your button, and I'll blow you up, and you'll blow me up, and Little Rocket Man and Baby Hands. I mean, when you look back at that, it looked like schoolboy stuff. And the press just ate that stuff up. And they were talking about, Trump's going to create World War III. We're going to get into a nuclear war. Trump's unstable. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. And here we are a month or two later, and we're going to, and North and South Korea have already agreed to end the war. And the U.S. will have no reason not to, I'm sure. Um, so I think it's a positive thing. I'm reminded that about 2 years ago, I did a story when Obama was president. I remember doing a story where a Chinese diplomat went to North Korea to talk to Kim Jong Un, and which is no surprise. It's done on a regular basis. But when he was done, instead of going home, this Chinese leader went to South Korea. And I remember saying at the time that that was a much bigger story than anybody gave it credit, because hardly anybody reported on that. And I speculated at the time, and I'm going to speculate again here. I want you to picture this. Right now, before anything happens, China is communist. North Korea is communist. China controls North Korea. These are facts. South Korea is aligned with the United States. They are a democracy, or close to a democracy, much different than the other two. And I remember saying at the time, if they could get rid of the Americans at the demilitarized zone and those two could become friends, what would happen to the Korean Peninsula? Do you think for a second that South Korea would influence North Korea? The only thing that would happen is that North Korea, through the power of China, would take the industrial stuff, the ability to make money and products from South Korea and move it into North Korea, so North Korea could become wealthy. But politically and ideologically speaking, China and North Korea would turn South Korea communist very quickly, either by force or by influence. Now, although I see the benefits of healing the war and the border, you got to ask yourself, what's the motivation for Kim Jong Un to all of a sudden do this? I think he sees, and I think China sees, that the uh, financial muscle of South Korea can be a great benefit, A, to help build North Korea, and B, for the technology to be taken and used by China for them to achieve their goal of 2025, to become dominant in certain fields, specifically in computer technology and manufacturing, both of which South Korea are leaders in, and China is being cut off by the United States. So they need that from South Korea. So I see warning flags, I see potential, but I see huge warning signs, and I hope the Trump administration is not being wooed into this. This has a potential to end very poorly. So let me just give you an example. Let's say that they end the war. The United States agrees to both demands. We will not attack, and we will end the war. So if we do that, that means we have to take our troops out, and the only thing is there's just a border. What if North Korea and China come down and forcefully go into and take over South Korea? We promise not to attack. So do we just leave them to fend for themselves? To lose all of their manufacturing, to lose their dominance in the computer technology sector, and we just stand by and let them be swallowed up? I see that as a very real possibility. Um, so I don't think, trust but verify. I would sign the agreements, but I insist that our troops stay there, um, and that we have good fences make good neighbors. And but it's interesting to me that we have these developments 2 years after the Chinese diplomat visits Kim Jong Un first, and then goes to South Korea, an unprecedented move that was largely looked over by the Western world. And now all of a sudden, we have these dynamic moves a couple of months after China declares they're going to be dominant in major fields in the world by 2025. Uh, so I just hope the United States is not going to be caught flat-footed. Well, that's about all I wanted to talk about. That ends our current events. Now, just an announcement or two before we go. I wanted to talk about these programs that we do, all of them on the internet, are all sponsored by the Prayer Box Ministry. That website, prayerboxministry.org, was designed to be an interactive website. Go over there and check us out. And one of the things I wanted to say that I have not mentioned in a while, uh, all of our programs that we do under the name of the Right Wing Reverend is available on iTunes. So if you have a device that you use iTunes for, go over to iTunes on the podcast and look up Right Wing Reverend, and all of our programs are there. We transferred them all, so there's 4 or 5 years worth of programs there. Go over there and check us out. That's the Right Wing Reverend on iTunes. And I hope you enjoyed. Also, go to our website at prayerboxministry.org. There's lots to do. That's an interactive website. You can join a prayer group. listen to our programs. Lots of videos to watch over there. Go there and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. Well, that's a program, everyone. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics. You have a blessed week.